Hello and welcome to the WA SACS Education and Information Workshop 2013. This is a project that's been run by NDS, the ACOSS and SCHADS Australia, and it's funded by the Australian Federal Government. What we're going to be discussing today is a number of things around the Modern Award. So we'll have a discussion about the transition to the Modern Award, the federal and state IR systems, transitional timetables, penalties and loadings, a bit of a discussion about other conditions, the Modern Award review in November 2012 and into the future, also a bit of a brief discussion about implementation issues, and the Equal Remuneration Order implementation. After that, we'll have a quick discussion about industrial obligations and funding. So the Fair Work Act applies in WA to organisations that are constitutional corporations and organisations that are non-constitutional corporations in states that have referred their IR powers to the Commonwealth, which, as most of you will be aware, is not in WA. There are a few small differences between the state and federal awards in terms of SCHADS and the ERO. The state system has SACS WA and not the ERO, you'll see there. The pay rates are slightly higher under the federal system and the ERO will apply. They saw a 2.9% increase in July 2012, whereas under the state system there was a 3.4% increase in July 2012. So that's the federal minimum wage increase in the federal system and the state wage increase in the state system. For casuals, they'll see a 2 or 3 hour minimum in terms of calls and 25% loading, whereas in the state system there's a 2 hour minimum and a 20% loading. In terms of redundancy, in the federal system there's no severance for small employers at this point in time, but I'll discuss that more further. And in the state system there is severance for small employers. In terms of shifts, there's no changes to definitions under the state or the federal system. There's no change under the state system and minimal changes under the federal system. There's some changes there's no remote allowances under the state system, under the federal system. And in terms of annual leave, the NES has 4 weeks per annum or 5 weeks for shift workers, whereas under the state system there is some additional leave for remote workers, so that's related a little bit to those remote allowances. In terms of compassionate leave, there's a couple of differences there in that under the federal system the definition is a little bit broader. It has illness or injury as well as death, whereas under the state system it is death only. The state system has 3 days paid on the occasion of death, whereas the federal system has 2 days per incident. In terms of the timetable for transitioning from former awards to SCHADS, so for people in the federal system, the classifications moved at July 2012, so hopefully everyone's already done that. Pay rates phased in from July 2012 to December 2020, so that's all the way through till 2020, and that's in relation to the ERO. Penalty rates and loadings phased in from July 2012 through till July 2014, so all the penalty rates and loadings will be completely phased by July next year. Allowances moved at January 2010, and there was no phasing there. And other conditions moved at January 2010, and again there was no phasing in of those conditions. An example to the way the shift loadings have been phased is in the case of WA, where now parts of that shift do not receive the loading, and so there's some phasing in there of certain elements of that. So you can see there that there's a 5% shift penalty there, whereas previously there would not have been. Whereas previously it would have been a 12.5% loading. And that's to do with phasing it out, so that's phasing it down to nothing. Whereas if the shift fits into what is now the shift definition, so if it finishes after 8 p.m, then it does get the full loading, which means there's no difference and it's exactly the same. So in a case where a shift doesn't finish after 8 p.m, but finishes between 7 and 8 p.m, where previously it would have been a shift under the state award, it now receives a 5% loading as a phasing out of what has happened previously. So there's further discussion of that as we move along. As you can see here, again it's another discussion there. So where it ends after 8 p.m. or finishes between 8 p.m. and midnight, there's no difference. PM and 8 PM, there is phasing out of that allowance. The night shift is the same, public holidays are the same, Saturdays are the same, Sundays are phasing up from 75% to 100%. In terms of the casual loading, again there's some phasing there from the previous allowance of 20% up to 25% between now and 2014. So at the moment it's 23% because it phased up. At July next year, July this year, sorry, it'll be 24%, and at July next year it will phase all the way up to 25%. The same goes for Saturdays in the morning, whereas previously for casuals there would have been a loading in the mornings. Now that loading will be phasing out, so at the moment it's at 20%. It'll phase down to 10% this year and out completely by next year, as will the Sunday loadings. So as you can see there, loadings on a Saturday and Sunday for casuals are being phased out completely. There is some element there of a take-home pay guarantee, and also these sorts of things are still the subject of modern award review. So with the take-home pay guarantee, that refers only to people's dollar value take-home pay. So there's no need to make up shift penalties to make up what people, the shortfall that people have come up with. It's only in terms of dollar value of take-home pay at the end of the week. It also doesn't take into account if you've changed people's shifts. Where this might impact upon someone is if you have a long-term casual who works every Sunday. Okay, so what's happened in the modern award review as of November 2012? There was some discussion of the sleepover due to some confusion. Certainly there were a number of applications made to clarify what is supposed to happen with the sleepover. Some felt that perhaps you could only work one side of the sleepover. It was clarified that you can work both sides of the sleepover, but you must have a 4-hour engagement on one side or the other. So that might mean you have a 4-hour engagement on one side and 1 hour on the other. That's fine. Or 4 hours on one side, 4 hours on the other. That's also fine. Or 6 hours on one side and 2 hours on the other, as long as there is at least a 4-hour minimum engagement on one side or the other. What was also discussed is that employers and employees may agree to reduce the break between shifts from 10 hours to 8 hours where they're associated with the sleepover. So this is only in relation to the break between shifts where one of those shifts is a sleepover. What this means practically for you is that you can have a discussion with your staff members about reducing those shift breaks to 8 hours. Probably best to put something in writing with them, even if it's a memo. Other changes were more around clarification. So there was some discussion about what a home care worker was. And what was clarified was that simply doing work in the home does not make it home care work. Certainly there's social and community services work that happens in the home. And so there's some clarification there that the work that occurs in the home must be home care work for it to be under that schedule. Simply being in the home does not make it home care. There are going to be, this is only part of what's been discussed at the moment, so the last of these things that have been decided by parties is the loadings are payable for broken shift determined by the end time of the shift, as you'll see through the shift descriptions, and also 24-hour care provisions only apply to home care workers, not to other workers. So what's still up in the air and hopefully will be reviewed as of April 2013 at some point, part-time employment, so that's discussion around conversion to part-time employment from casual, small employer redundancy, and a lot of that comes out of WA, where there has previously been small employer redundancy and there is no longer under the modern award. Some further discussion around broken shifts and how they function, casual penalty rates, so those Saturday and Sunday penalty rates, discussion around annual leave, and also some discussion around public holidays. So those issues should be determined at some point into the future by a Commissioner. Okay, so those, some of the implementation issues we've had are rostering arrangements and how much sense they still make under the SCHADS. I think in WA those haven't come up as huge issues. The main concern is that afternoon shift that changes a little bit now. For some people that won't have an impact because your shift arrangements don't fall into that grey area which was previously a shift and now is no longer. Certainly long-term casuals and part-time employment. There's certainly scope across the industry and across the country for better use of part-time employment. The issue is really that long-term casuals become part-time employees, whether or not you call them part-time or whether or not you call them casual. If they are regular and systematic, and that does not necessarily mean exactly the same shifts every week, it could mean just similar hours every week, they do become part-time employees, whether you call them a casual employee and pay them as a casual employee or not. So certainly there is a need for people to move those casual, regular and systematic casuals across onto part-time to avoid those kind of liabilities such as back pay claims for annual leave and whatnot. There's certainly been some discussion around job design and classifications. Certainly one of the pitfalls around classifications is where we want people to share higher duties and learn new things, but what we effectively can be doing is many of those employees are now at a higher classification. So we certainly do have to have a look at the way we design our jobs and how that works in terms of our classifications and how best to make use of our workers. Where people have enterprise agreements and how those interact with the modern award, agreements remain in force after their expiry date until they are replaced or terminated. So this is the case with the state and federal agreements where you've got them in place. Provided there's no reduction to the NES, the conditions continue to apply where they are different to SCHADS or modern award. So if you have an agreement, effectively, as long as they are as good as the national employment standards, they continue to be implemented in exactly the same way, and you don't have to change to these new SCHADS arrangements. Pay rates must match the modern award plus the ERO rates where you're a federal system employer. And so that just means you might need to cross-check that whatever your increases that you've been providing are still above whatever someone would be entitled to under the modern award plus the ERO. So that includes the transitional rates. So that's just a bit of a stumbling block there, just a little bit careful of. If agreement has a different classification structure, so you've made up a new classification structure that fits with your organisation a little bit better, you need to normally translate people to the modern award. So that means you still need to go through the process of translating your staff to the modern award and monitor the rates for the life of the agreement. So you still need to go through this process even if you have an agreement. You just may not need to be paying those rates, but you do need to double check that what you're paying is still above the modern award rates. Okay, so the ERO implementation, the modern award rates increased by between 23 and 45%. That includes the 4% increase to do with barriers to bargaining. So if anyone talks to you about a 4% increase, that's included in that 23 to 45%. There's no need to add it later or do anything different with it. It's in that 23 to 45% increase. The full amount will be payable by 2020. So that means we're going to be doing this translation and transitioning stuff all the way through till 2020. It's phased in by 9 equal instalments each December. So that's still true. So even though we will be doing some specific translation and doing some ways around that, it's still going to be 9 equal instalments. So in terms of your budgeting, you can use what the increases have been in the past as a bit of a guesstimate in terms of what they'll be into the future. Pay rates are affected by transitional arrangements for moving from old awards to SCHADS. So we'll see that in just a moment. So with the old award rates, they are maintained as transitional award rates. So they're still transitional award rates. They're not, in fact, what we used to call above award rates. We call them transitional award rates, and they're treated like award rates, so you still have to maintain them above awards. If they are lower than the modern award rates, then what you'll find is you need to move directly to the modern award. The transitional rates increase at a slower rate to the modern award rates, but get to the same equal remuneration in 2020, and so they will be going to the same place. They won't be maintained above award forever. Okay, so this is how you calculate it, where A equals the equal remuneration payment, or where we're going to in 2020 at this point in time. So that does change and move every year because we do have the CPI increases, and it is impacted upon by those CPI increases or the federal minimum wage increases. Where B equals the award rate, which is where we are now. So for most people that is going to be a preserved transitional award payment, but it could also be the modern award. Each December we add 1/9 of the difference between those two. So at December 2012 we would have added 1/9 of the difference between. At December 2013 we'll add 2/9. It's that simple, but it does have to be recalculated every year, so that's why you can't just decide now what it's going to be, is because it's impacted upon by the federal minimum wage increase or the CPI increase, as we sometimes call it. So it does need to be recalculated, and these do need to be redone every year. So this is what it looks like in terms of a bar graph. So that's where A equals where we're going in 2020, the ERO payment. Where B in this case equals current modern award rate. So this is where someone might be on the modern award. We take away B from A, and then we divide it by 9 and add 1/9 of the difference. So there you can see it. In the case of a preserved modern award rate, so the transitional rate, again we do the same thing. We take away B from A, and we add 1/9 of the difference. So as you can see, someone who is on a higher rate remains on a higher rate than someone on the modern award. They still get an increase, and they will get an increase every year, but it's just a smaller increase than this person here down on the modern award. So they will remain above that person, and they will remain above that person all the way through until 2020, but they will see smaller increases, and they will always see a smaller increase than this person on the modern award. This is what it looks like in terms of what the full increases will be for the modern award. The thing to remember is this is what it is for the modern award and not for transitional rates. So this is the maximum it would ever be for any employee on each of these levels, but it won't reflect what it actually is for people on transitional rates. The thing to also be aware of is this is reliant on what the CPI increases are going to be. So this isn't exactly 100%. It may differ if you have unusual translations, or it may differ if you have something else going on in your workplace. So this is what it looks like for two people moving from, say, and we use this as an example from New South Wales because the difference is a bit bigger, so it's just easier for the graph. So someone going from a SACS New South Wales level 3.1 and someone on a modern award level 3.1. So as you can see, that down the bottom is the modern award, the slightly darker green, and that one still goes to the same place. We're all going to the same place in 2020. It's just that the modern award, the transitional rate, which is the one sitting above, the lighter one, just moves at a slightly slower rate, and it's a bit bumpy because of the CPI increases. So that's what it looks like as a graph. We're still going in the same place. Someone on a transitional rate will always remain above someone on a modern award rate through till 2020, but it just gets closer and closer as time moves on. So yes, this all does mean that you have to continue to translate positions all the way through till 2020. So if you create a new position in July 2019, you will have to look at that under the modern award and under the state award to make sure that you get the correct transitional rate. So all this has to continue going on until 2020. Okay, so the good news is you can get pay tables. Jobs Australia pay tables are now available online through NDS. So you'll have access to those at least through till July and possibly beyond that. They present the most likely translations together with the applicable pay rates. So the modern award rate or the transitional award rate, whichever is the higher. If you have an unusual calculation, you might need to contact someone to help you with that, either your employer organisation or whomever you normally work with for your pay tables. So whilst it's good to know how you do translate these pay scales and how they all work, there are a number of tools out there to help you. So certainly you can get a pay table from us at the moment, as well as there's also the Fair Work Ombudsman's calculator. It's probably best not to rely simply on a calculator on its own because it's not always 100%, so it's probably good to cross-check with your own calculations against the Fair Work Ombudsman's calculator. This is an example of the Jobs Australia pay tables. So as you can see, they represent likely translations. So if you have an unusual situation, and it can happen, although my first question to you is going to be to check your translations if this isn't what you have. But look, it's certainly possible to have other translations, but 2 to 2, 3 to 3, that's the most likely at this level. If you have someone who's gone, for example, from a previous SACS WA classification of worker 2 through to a SACS employee level 3, you might have to have a chat to someone about how that works. So you can contact Jobs Australia or your employer organisation, and they should be able to help you out with how you get from a 2 to a 3 for that particular worker. This is what the Ombudsman's website looks like. So this is the calculator. So you go in through SACS and Community Services, so through the Modern Award, and that will give you a number of options in terms of the old state awards so that you can have a look and see what the calculator comes up with. Again, it may struggle with unusual calculations as well. Again, this is what it looks like once you get in there to have a look at the difference. Okay, so in terms of industrial obligations and funding, so we need to be clear about what these all mean in terms of what happens if your funding is insufficient or what happens if your funding is a bit different. The Commonwealth Government has committed to fully fund its share, including directly funded and jointly funded programs. So that's good news, but it really does depend on what's happening on the ground with you, and you need to check in on that. The 8-year phase-in is to assist unfunded programs as well as government budgeting. The Commonwealth supplementation, so state supplementation is going to be different to this, is based on the cost of the ERO or SACS level 4. So now what this is about is that there had to be some sort of formula. It was that or in making employers report back exactly what's going on in their organisations, which would have been timely for would have been costly in terms of time for organisations. And on the whole, this should work at least as an approximation. If anything about this is not ringing true for you, then you're going to need to contact your funding bodies and let them know that this doesn't work for you because of a number of reasons, which we'll discuss later. So there are 3 components. The equal remuneration increase the applicable rate at level 4. In the case of the last increase, it was 1.86% for the transitional award rate. Now that's because it was only for 7 months, from December to June 2013. The proportion of the program funding allocated to SACS wages in particular and your grant amount. So for example, if you have a 70% SACS wages component, which you may or may not, it could be higher for your organisation, for a $1 million grant, you get 1.86 times the 70% wages component times the 1 million. So as you can see there, it would be just a little over 13,000, and it's going to be approximately 35,000 for the 2013 to 2014 period. Now, as you can see, that might not be as high as what you were expecting, but that's because there's a number of factors in play here. One is that it was only for 7 months. 2 is that we're talking about the transitional rate, rates. And the third, of course, is the 70% wages component. If you're not working with the 70% wages component, that's going to be one of the first things that you report back. And certainly if you, for example, have a lot of employees at a higher level than 4, for example, a lot of employees at level 5, you might find that that's the type of thing you need to report back and to challenge in terms of your funding body to let them know that that's the reason the formula doesn't work for your organisation. In terms of WA supplementation, as you can see there, there are now 2 systems in operation, the WA State Workplace Relations System as well as the Federal Workplace Relations System. Now there's been a number of things happen in WA, certainly around funding, and there was a significant bump to funding a little while back for most organisations, and that was supposed to cover your State Workplace Relations System employees. So you'll need to be looking into that and cross-checking that. Anyone who's a constitutional corporation should come under the Federal Workplace Relations System. As we've discussed on a number of occasions in WA, it's very hard to work out who that's going to be and who that's not going to be, and you have to do it on an organisation by organisation basis. And I certainly would encourage you to be getting advice on that where you can, but there's also the understanding that it's going to be difficult. SACS employees are employed by non-constitutional corporations in WA, clearly going to be under the WA State Workplace Relations System, and therefore it's going to be a question of state funding. So you're not covered by the ERO increase in that case, but you'll still receive the national wage increase. So it can be a little bit complicated for those workers, and certainly in terms of how you function as an organisation, it's going to be a bit difficult. So SACS employees employed by a constitutional corporation, again, as we said, they're under the National Workplace Relations System, and they're going to be subject to the ERO. The problem there might be that if you are covered by the state system, you really can't be asking for funding around the ERO, and that might throw up problems for you in terms of what people's expectations are, and you might need to have a look at that. So are you in scope? Funding agencies provide supplementation to programs that are expected to employ SACS workers. So there's no commitment to supplement where not industrially obliged. So as we discussed there, you're going to have trouble getting funding for the ERO if you're not in the federal system. Therefore, you might have workers who might have been expecting an ERO increase who are not actually entitled to it, and certainly you're going to have to struggle because you won't have the funding for it. There's also a number of problems with award coverage, and certainly in the past, organisations have brought all their employees under one award just because it was simpler, and that may not necessarily be correct. Where you might see problems around that is where you might have people under children's services, labour market assistants, aged care, nurses or health professionals. So if you've employed a nurse to run a program for you, you are going to have to consider the fact that that employee is not in fact covered by the SACS award and may well have to be coming under the nurse award. Just because you employ someone who is a nurse doesn't mean they're under the nurse's award. It has to be someone who you're employing as a nurse and whom you have had a discussion with. There are two main tests for coverage by industry awards. One is if the work is within the industry as defined by the award. So are you a SACS employer? That's going to be the big main test. And for most of you that's going to be an easy one. And then it's going to be, is the work covered by the classification definitions in the award? So that's why our admin workers who previously might have been under a different award now come under the SACS award, SCHADS award, the London award, because what they're doing can actually be covered by the classifications. So you don't need to do everything within a classification, but what you do can be described by that classification. Then you're covered. It can even cover people like home maintenance workers, but may not cover someone like a carpenter. So that's where we get into the grey areas and where you might want to get a little bit of help. Where SCHADS apply, ensure you're using the correct classification. So there we had a discussion earlier about home care and how that can be a little bit more complicated for people because the home care classification isn't covered by the ERO increases. Okay, industrial obligations and funding. Where you have insufficient funding, that is not a reason not to pay your employees the correct rate. Unfortunately, we can't afford it. It isn't something that the industrial bodies are interested in hearing. So it's one of those unfortunate things where the legislation doesn't talk to each other. If you can't afford to pay it, you really have to go through finding other revenue or absorbing or drawing on reserves, reducing wages through attrition, restructure, redundancy, those sorts of issues. At the moment, not a lot of people are saying that that's been the impact upon through the ERO. However, the reality is that we can't simply not pay the ERO because we can't afford it. Employees are employed by your organisation, not the funding body. So it's not going to do for you to say, well, the funding body didn't pay us correctly, and therefore we can no longer pay you at the correct rate. Same goes for really putting things in contracts that say your position is subject to funding. It's fine to say that you're subject to funding, but if they no longer have a position with your organisation, you may still need to go through a redundancy process with them because they're employed by you and not the funding body. And that's the end of our presentation today. If you have any further questions, certainly feel free to contact Dion from NDS.